Jai Shri Ram. As I've discussed a couple times on my channel before, I used to be a staunch non-vegetarian before becoming a vegetarian in early April of this year. So I've now been a vegetarian for a little over 8 months now. And I just had something happen to me at the grocery store related to that. So I was pushing my cart past this other guy's cart that had some items in it, and inside his cart was a bag of bloody pieces of what looked like flesh. And that sight really it made me feel repulsed, and I was taken aback at seeing this horrifying sight. Now, if you're from India and you've never lived in the West, the meat that people buy here in America doesn't really look like that at all in grocery stores. It's very cleaned up, cut uniformly, plastic wrapped, and made to look like this kind of generic consumer product as opposed to a gruesome, assortment of pieces of dead animals. But that's what this bag of stuff in this guy's cart looked like to me. So, again, I felt really repulsed by that. So naturally, I wanted to get closer to see what it specifically was. And what's interesting was I saw it and figured out what it was because it was diced goat meat, which is actually something that I used to really enjoy buying and eating. Back when I was a non-vegetarian, after lamb, goat was my second favorite meat to prepare and to eat. So this was actually an item that I had bought and prepared fairly often. And now I was having this really kind of visceral feeling of disgust towards it. Now, in my days of eating non-vegetarian food, obviously I knew that I was eating animals, and animals specifically that were killed so that people could eat them. And of course, I was also aware that in Hindu Dharma, it's strongly discouraged to do that. And it's, on the other side, strongly encouraged to give it up and become a vegetarian. But that didn't really bother me. I just enjoyed eating meat. And it wasn't even like I'm one of these like modern gym oriented guys that are into all this protein stuff like that. I just liked eating meat. I just found it enjoyable. But this experience I had, again, after about 8 months of being vegetarian now, it made me feel on a base emotional kind of a level that this was an animal that had been slaughtered, and it awakened in me a sense of compassion that for that animal, and then in general for animals that are slaughtered for human consumption. And in all my days of eating meat, I'd really never experienced this kind of a feeling at all, despite the fact that I've eaten a lot of meat from a lot of different kinds of animals throughout the years, and also prepared it as well. And I feel that eating all of this meat as it's a tamasic food, and because of the fact that you kind of rationalize to yourself that it's okay to eat it since you're habituated to it and you enjoy it and all of that, it really dulls your sense of right and wrong when it comes to this issue of eating meat. And it also dulls your sense of compassion towards other living beings. And so on another topic here in America, just as a related topic to this, people are in the habit of grilling meat. They'll call it barbecuing or grilling or whatever the case may be. They'll have a charcoal or propane powered grill that they'll grill like burgers, hot dogs, and things of this nature. And so because I live in an apartment complex, some people have little grills on their balcony that they'll use, and that smell wafts around and things like that. And back when I was non-vegetarian, I found this smell to be very appetizing. It was like I would smell grilling meat coming from someone else, and it would make me not really make me hungry, but you get that, you start thinking about food and you want to eat food even if you're not actually experiencing hunger, right? I mean, I think everybody would have felt that way for smelling whatever kind of a food that you enjoy. But now when I've smelled that recently, I feel more off-put by it because one, it's not my food, like it's not the kind of food that I'm habituated myself to eating. And two, again, this issue of, actually feeling compassion for animals, being aware of the fact that these are slaughtered animals and things like that, which again, I feel like that only really comes once you don't eat them anymore, because you can have that on a kind of mental or intellectual level, but you don't really feel that until you've given up this kind of a practice. So, I wanted to mention this specifically because something that I have heard from people who like are non-vegetarian and try to become vegetarian is that they feel like the smell of meat tempts them to come back to eating it. And what I found is basically the opposite. Once you've been a vegetarian for a certain period of time, you kind of develop the same or similar kind of a disgust and distaste for meat and the smell of meat that lifelong vegetarians have. And of course, obviously, the one difference being you used to eat meat and enjoy it, and now you don't anymore. And one other side thing to kind of mention here is that usually when Indian non-vegetarians make these comments about the smell of meat, being very tempting to them, they're not really being honest, because what they mean is the smell of onions and ginger garlic paste. Because when you make non-vegetarian like Indian recipes, all three of these ingredients, onions, ginger, and garlic, are so heavily featured in most of the non-vegetarian recipes pretty much throughout India in different regions. And so it's that kind of a smell that people are associating with meat, and it's kind of making their mouth water and it making them feel tempted and things like that. And I mean, unless you're eating tandoori chicken, kebabs, and stuff like that, it's the smell of those three things, onions, ginger, and garlic, that's actually tempting you as opposed to the smell of actual meat. And I think that if these people kind of opted for a more sattvic diet instead of just cutting out meat, that they would come to experience the changes in sensibility in the palate that I mentioned. I think where a lot of non-vegetarians who are trying to become vegetarians go wrong is that instead of doing what I just described, trying to become sattvic, they instead just want to cut out meat and change as little as possible. Meaning they'll still eat eggs because they've convinced themselves that eggs are somehow vegetarian, even though in our, culture and religious understanding, they're very clearly non-vegetarian. And they'll also regularly use onions and garlic in cooking, quite often. And I mean, I've seen so many recipes for paneer that look exactly like meat recipes that I used to prepare, but instead of adding meat, they add paneer. I mean, so many of these steps from, slicing onions, caramelizing them, adding ginger garlic paste, all of these kinds of things that, when I would make chicken and lamb and goat and stuff, these are things that I would do. I'm seeing online same exact kind of things except putting paneer in instead of meat. And I think this is exactly the kind of thing that makes it feel difficult for people who are trying to give up eating meat, because you're not allowing your actual tastes to change. You're not allowing your palate to change. You're not acclimatizing yourself to a different set of flavor profiles, a different set of smells, a different set of kind of expectations of what comes in a meal. Instead, you're trying to keep things as similar to what you're used to as you can, but just eliminating meat. And I think, again, as I talk about culture and being Indian and all of these things on my channel, this is what Western people do. You see, because Western people, they don't traditionally have vegetarianism in their culture. So they will have these kind of fake meats made out of soy and whatever else, and all these, egg substitutes and this substitute and that substitute, because all they're doing is trying to replace meat with something else. Whereas for us in our own culture, we have a totally different set of recipes and dishes and flavor profiles and all of that for vegetarian food as compared to non-vegetarian food. And another thing, like I've kind of been saying in this whole video, the overarching theme that I want to make is that whether you're trying to become vegetarian, or maybe you are vegetarian already and you're just trying to maybe eat healthier or cook more food for yourself instead of going out or whatever the case may be, what I've found is that if you can purposely continue to eat a certain way and change your diet, you can basically change the kinds of preferences that you have for food, what you crave, the food that you think about. I mean, when I think about food now, I only really think about wanting to eat the kind of food that I already make, or the kind of food that maybe my mom makes, but I haven't learned those dishes yet or mastered those dishes yet, which are again just, South Indian vegetarian foods. And I don't really think about, I mean, I definitely don't think about meat anymore at all. And I don't think about even going to restaurants, which is something that I used to, um, like in the past, like when I was a teenager, when I would think of food, for example, I would think of like Mexican restaurants, Chinese restaurants, Indian restaurants, so on and so forth. And now I just think about the food that I already normally eat, either made by me or my mom. And again, that's something that goes beyond just the veg, non veg thing, health food, and all of that. This is just a general kind of an piece of advice that I would want to give to people who are trying to make a long term lifestyle change for their diet is that you shouldn't feel kind of a prisoner to your current dietary preferences. The foods that you really crave now, that are your favorite foods right now, that's not set in stone. That you don't have to, that doesn't have to be your favorite food for the rest of your life until you die of a heart attack when you're 50 years old. You can actually reacclimatize yourself to preferring food that's more, healthy, wholesome, sattvic, so on and so forth. So that's all I've got for you guys today. Please like, comment, share, and subscribe. Jai Shri Ram.